German three-tone camo is one of the coolest looking paint jobs in scale modeling. It's also one of the toughest to pull off. The patterns are hard to control, you have to be really careful about overspray and splotches, and oftentimes blending the colors without making a mess can feel impossible. In this video, I'm going to walk you through how I tackle each of these challenges so that you can nail that classic camo look on your models. Hi, I'm Ryan, and welcome to my channel, Sprue Goo. If you find this video interesting, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel for lots more modeling. The first step is obviously the primer. In this case, I used the black Mr. Finishing Surfacer 1500. By far my favorite primer. I like to have the dark colors over it because it helps kind of fill in case you miss some of those nooks and crannies. Though I will say, I think a brown primer or a red primer would probably be a better choice for the yellow base coat like on these German tanks. I think next time I'm going to pull out the brown primer for this tank. But I'm not unhappy with the way the black worked out here. And this is such a good quality primer. It takes care of a lot of the issues that you come into it with, like, glue spots and scratches and things like that. It helps kind of fill those in. So it gives you a better even surface before you lay down that base coat. Speaking of the base coat, with my German tanks, I usually go with Tamiya dark yellow, but I didn't have enough of it for this behemoth of a tank. So I used these two Ammo Atom Dunkelgelb paints mixed together. I thinned them at about 60-40, probably closer to 70-30, thinner to paint. Supposedly you can spray this paint without thinning, but like Santa or the Easter Bunny, paint you can airbrush without thinning, in my opinion, just doesn't exist. So it's really good paint, I will say that, but you do have to thin it. I like the coverage, it's nice and even, but again, you've got to thin it. I tried it once without the thinner, and I ended up cleaning my airbrush for a long time. It was a hell of a mess. As with most airbrush paint jobs in scale modeling, this is about 2 or 3 thin coats that I put on for the yellow here. After I'm done with that, I'm going to lighten it up using the same 2 colors and do a little bit of post shading. In hindsight, I think that was probably not necessary, especially with the camo job, and because I'm going to lighten up some of those higher parts on the tank with oils later on in the weathering process. And I'm not going to do any post shading with the brown or green camo colors on this one either, which I'll speak to a little bit more in a sec. Another thing you're going to notice here is that I'm painting it with the tracks on. It's not an ideal situation. I would much rather paint the tracks separately, but it's not unworkable either. You can still get a good color on your tracks without painting them separately on the tank. It's just a lot easier to paint and weather them while they're off the model itself. The main reason I didn't do that is because the link and length tracks on this Ryefield kit went together so nicely, and I didn't want to screw it up. In the past, I've not had good experiences with Ryefield tracks, especially their plastic workable ones. But these went on great, and they fit together really nicely. I just didn't want to risk messing it up by taking them off and on the tank again. All right, so the first thing with painting this 3-tone camo is to have a reference photo. Even if you're not going to copy the reference photo step by step in your paint job, it gives you a really nice idea of how those red and green camo blobs, or brown and green rather, camo blobs should look on the tank. You can see that they don't end just where the sides of the tank do. They go up over multiple surfaces into the turret. It's just really helpful to have a reference to guide you a little bit, just to give you some visual idea of how those brown and green spots are going to go on the tank. It also helps the color mix stay balanced so that you don't get too much brown or too much green when you're painting this thing. All right, and the first thing I think a lot of people come to the table with these 3-tone camo paint jobs is hard lines or soft lines. Now, obviously, you can use there's a lot of great tutorials out there where you can use masking to get a hard edge camo on this. I don't like doing that with the German tanks. In true confession, partly because I don't like messing around with the masking putty, but also these tanks the camo pattern on these tanks was painted on in the field, usually with a spray gun. I've got a reference photo here. I think you've probably seen this reference photo in 100 other German tank model videos, but it holds true. These are applied in the field with a spray gun, so you get soft lines on them. All right, there's a few things you have to do to avoid getting a splotchy paint job when you're going to freehand airbrush this German camo pattern. First and foremost, thin your paint. I cannot emphasize that enough. I'm using Tamiya for the brown and the green spots on here, and I've thinned it at about 40-60, maybe even a little closer to 70-30, and that's 60 to 70% thinner, 40 to 30% paint. So, again, err on the side of caution when you thin your paint. It's easier to add it than it is to take it off. Another thing it's really important with this camo paint job, proper pressure on your compressor. There's no magic number, but generally you want to go to a lower pressure since you need to be very close to the surface. I'm at about 15 psi on my compressor. I think my compressor runs a little hotter than it should in terms of what the gauge says versus the actual pressure that's coming out. But again, go low pressure with it. You may need to experiment around a little bit, even on a side piece of plastic or a piece of cardboard or something like that. Just kind of, play around with it until you get a low pressure that's still easily controllable. Another thing, stay close to the surface. The closer you are, the tighter your lines will be. But because you're working closely, that's why the paint consistency and air pressure are so important. If you get tip dry and you try to blow through it, you're going to get a huge mess instead of a nice camo pattern on there. So inevitably, with a paint job like this, you are going to get some splotches, especially when you're just starting out and doing it for the first few times. I remember the first few three-tone camo paint jobs I painted were a friggin' mess. With acrylic paints like this, you can wipe away small bloopers with a wet paintbrush, but you have to act really fast. Another thing you can do is either add a little bit of retarder or some airbrush flow improver with it. That helps kind of slow down the drying time just a little bit and gives you another half second or two to kind of work with, erase any of those spots that you get with a wet paintbrush. Now, the easiest way to take care of some splotchy paint is just to cover it with the camo color, either the brown or the green when you're laying it down. But again, you can't do that if it's a really big or bad splotch. In that case, you may have to go back and just hit it with the base color yellow. That's happened to me before. It's really not hard. It's just a pain in the butt because you got to go back and clean out your airbrush and load it up with the base color again and get the ratios right. But, that'll help you kind of knock down some of the splotchiness if you do get some, or even if you want to just go back and, make the lines a little bit finer in the process. That's certainly an option that you have. Now, I did get a few splotches with this paint job, but they were small enough that I didn't really do anything with it because I'm gonna come back and cover it up with the weathering process. For the green, I used a Tamiya XF11. That's the JN green. Normally, I'd probably go with a little lighter tone, but this green is dark enough that it's not going to disappear under the weathering, which I think in the past for me, too light of a green tends to get really washed out if you're going to do some heavy weathering on the tank. Coming back to the topic of post-shading three-tone camo, I've done it before, but I've found that with the weathering, it's not especially necessary. And I'm going to lighten parts, like I said earlier, I'm going to lighten some of the parts on this thing with oil filters. So again, it's really not necessary. And another thing I'm trying to do with the camo splotches is, since the paint is relatively thin on this, I can alternate between a little bit lighter and darker tones just by how much paint I'm putting in those camo blobs. That gives me some of the darker spots on the sides and some of the lighter spots on the top as I spray it on there. The three-tone camo is painted and it looks pretty stark. As a matter of fact, it looks a little unnatural. So to tone it down, I'm going to spray it with a light misting of dark yellow over the whole thing. This will help lighten the brown and green colors. It'll also make these things blend together a little smoother. Now the trick with this is light mist. And keep your airbrush a lot further away from the tank than you did with when you were painting the camo up close on it. I mean, it's basically just a filter, right? With the paint job done, I'm also going to go back and put red oxide primer down where the side skirts have been torn off. I started to tape off the fenders, but I found that wasn't really necessary. And I'm just going to use this index card as an easy way to mask off the line where the red primer goes. And it does a pretty good job. I didn't get any bleed through with it. So if you do it carefully, you don't have to bother with all the tape and masking just to get that little bit of red oxide primer along the bottom sides of the tank there. Now, I probably could have done this after the initial yellow base coat, or I could have even, had I used a red primer to begin with, I could have just taped off that part and sprayed the yellow base coat and been done with it. But it's fine. It worked out, no problem. One thing to note, remember not to put camo on this part. This is where the side skirts of the tank would have been. Those field teams that paint the camo on there are not going to be covering any of the red oxide primer parts. In fact, because when they put that paint on there in the first place, this tank would have still had the side skirts on there. Now, this ain't your daddy's three-tone German camo paint job. This is the ambush camo paint scheme, to be more specific. And that's, basically the little dots and blobs that go on the tank that help give it an extra layer of camo in the forest camo to protect it from marauding Allied fighter bombers. This is a pretty easy step. We're just going to be putting small yellow dots on the brown and green blobs. The key here, though, is to keep them small and to not put too many on there. There's not really a formula for it. Just kind of keep an eye on what you're doing. Just don't crowd the dots out. Don't overwhelm the camo scheme with the dots. I used a paintbrush. You can use an airbrush too. Totally up to you how you're feeling that day. Same thing with the brown and green dots. I'm going to put those on the yellow parts of the camo scheme. And, again, just kind of applying them without overloading the area with brown and green dots here. So I did not put it on the wheels. That's up to you if you want to paint the wheels and apply the ambush camo to them. I just left them the dark yellow, and they're going to get weathered up that you wouldn't really see a lot of the camo paint job anyway. And that, my friends, is a three-tone German ambush camo paint job. Now, while that's the end of the camo paint job, it's not the end of the painting process for this model. Next up, I'm going to hit the details, starting with the tracks. And for the tracks, and you'll have to excuse me because I did not get very good video of this. I just used AK markers. I used a black one overall, and then I hit the teeth on the inside of the track with a dark aluminum. And then I came back and used kind of a rusty colored acrylic wash over those tracks. A lot of that paint job is going to get covered up with the weathering process because I'm going to go with a pretty heavy mud layer on this tank. So you're not going to see a ton of details on the tracks anyway once that's all on there. For the tools, pretty standard operating procedure. I'm using a German gray for the base layer on the business end of the shovel, the axe, the hammer, the bolt cutters. I'm going to use a light brown to get the wood handles on the tools, and then I'm going to use an orange brown for the bolt cutter handles, since those are mostly made of Bakelite. For the tow cables, I'm going to paint those a dark rusty color. Now you see I've got two different tow cables here. One, I used the nylon string that came with the model. I hate the nylon string that they give you for tow cables. So I had an extra copper one laying around, but it's a little thinner, so it's not quite to scale, but I think it was a fair enough trade-off because I do like the way the metal one looks a lot better. I'm courting a little bit of controversy with the barrel cleaning rods on the side of the tank. Those are most often painted a wooden color, but I saw a black metallic one on the King Tiger at the Tank Museum in the UK, so I went with that. It gives you a little bit more color deviation on the model. I think another kind of focal point to draw you in a little bit and not be washed out in a sea of yellow, brown, and green. And second to the last step here, I'm going to put the decals on the tank. This doesn't have a lot of decals. As a matter of fact, there are just 4, the number and the little black cross on each side of the turret. I did not cover it with varnish first. I just used a little bit of microsol on the surface, put the decal down, and then come back with a little bit more microsol on top of that. All right, so that's it. That's my process for painting three-tone German camo. I will say there are lots of different ways to do this. This is certainly not the right way or the wrong way to do it. The best advice I ever got for painting this kind of stuff is experiment around with it. Do what you're comfortable with. Do what you like. I mean, if you really screw it up, you can always come back and strip the paint and start from scratch again if you absolutely have to. But again, get creative with it. Have fun. It's your model. In the next video, we're going to cover the chipping and weathering process, dirt, dust, and mud, all that good stuff, and put the finishing touches on this bad boy. Okay, hit that like and subscribe button, If you have any comments or questions or anything, be sure to leave them down below. I try to respond to everybody, try to keep it nice. But yeah, other than that, happy modeling, everybody, and thanks for watching.